Capitol over a $3 billion loan the governor is requesting for Medi-Cal.
The Trump administration continues to cut the federal workforce. There are also concerns about cuts coming to federal funding. Republican lawmakers have been eyeing cutting down programs like Medicaid, and we spoke with healthcare advocates and officials to see what possible
tonight,
cuts.
State lawmakers this week received notice that California will require a $3.4 billion loan to cover expenses for Medi-Cal, which more than 15 million Californians are enrolled in.
Some state Republicans are now calling on the governor to cut Medi-Cal access to undocumented residents, which they say has led to this need for a bailout.
California's Medicaid program, called Medi-Cal, hit a major budget snag in 2025, with costs running billions of dollars above projections. This program provides health coverage to nearly 15 million Californians, about 1/3 of the state's population. Lawmakers and officials were caught off guard by an unexpected $2 billion shortfall, forcing emergency measures to keep the program funded. In this video, we're going to break down how this gap emerged, what's driving the soaring costs, and how it fits into Medi-Cal's decades-long growth story. This is going to be a long and detailed video, so I want to ask all you guys to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It takes a lot of time and effort to research a video like this, and I'd love to keep providing this type of content for you guys, and I'd really appreciate your support. Now, in early 2025, state budget officials revealed that Medi-Cal spending was far above what had been budgeted. The gap for the current fiscal year, 2024 to 2025, was estimated at roughly $2.8 billion in additional general fund dollars needed. Now, this was on top of a $3.4 billion internal loan that the state had already taken to cover critical Medi-Cal payments. Combined, that's about $6.2 billion overrun beyond the original budget signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. In other words, California had to scramble to find over $6 billion extra dollars just to pay Medi-Cal bills through June of 2025. Now, such a shortfall is unprecedented in recent memory. It signals that costs have jumped much faster than expected. In fact, officials said that they needed to borrow the maximum amount allowed, about $3.44 billion, to cover immediate Medi-Cal bills, which would only carry the program through the end of March 2025. Now, this emergency patch, while keeping providers paid, underscored the severity of the situation. The surprise gap also weighed on the state's broader budget. California's Legislative Analyst's Office, the LAO, noted that overall, 2025 to 2026 state budget outlook would have a roughly $2 billion deficit. This is due in part to higher Medi-Cal costs. So why is Medi-Cal facing this shortfall? State health officials described a perfect storm of cost drivers hitting all at once. Several factors contributed to the 2025 Medi-Cal budget shortfall, including policy changes and demographic shifts that increased enrollment, as well as rising healthcare prices. Now, let's just review a few of the primary causes. Firstly, we have surging enrollment among seniors. Multiple news reports have talked about one major factor being that a rapid growth of Medi-Cal enrollment among seniors and older adults has been a factor. California's 65+ population has been growing, and more low-income seniors are qualifying for Medi-Cal. In fact, the Medi-Cal senior caseload jumped about 13% in 1 year, from roughly 1.28 million seniors in fiscal year 2023 to 2024 to about 1.44 million in 2024-25. This surge is striking because overall Medi-Cal enrollment was expected to decline post-pandemic. Yet the senior segment is rising sharply. Seniors tend to have higher healthcare costs on average compared to the broader population, which can drive up spending. Now, policy changes made it easier for seniors to enroll as well. As of January 1st, 2024, California eliminated the asset test for Medi-Cal eligibility for seniors. It no longer counting savings, homes, or cars, meaning many more seniors now qualify based solely on income. This expansion of eligibility led to an influx of newly eligible seniors signing up. Michelle Bass, director of the Department of Healthcare Services, told lawmakers that this policy change was one of several unprecedented shifts that all happened simultaneously. The bottom line here is that more seniors on Medi-Cal equals higher costs. The LAO specifically flagged the rapidly growing senior caseload as a primary driver of higher spending in 2024 to 2025. Now, we also have to talk about rising prescription drug costs. Another budget buster has been the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs for Medi-Cal patients. Pharmacy spending in Medi-Cal has shot up beyond projections, adding well over $1 billion in unanticipated costs. Compared to what was budgeted, California had to add about $1.6 billion, including about $1.3 billion state general fund in 2024 to 2025 to cover higher pharmacy expenses. Year over year, drug spending is expected to keep climbing, roughly another $1.2 billion increase in the following year. So what's driving these costs? Well, news reports are indicating that officials have pointed to increased utilization of high-cost medications, notably new anti-obesity drugs in the class of GLP-1 agonists. These pharmaceuticals, for example, drugs like semaglutide, known by brand names such as Ozempic or Wegovy, which I'm sure we've all heard of, are in high demand and they come with hefty price tags. GLP-1 drugs have significantly contributed to rising Medi-Cal pharmacy costs in recent years. Additionally, specialized gene therapies, cancer treatments, and other breakthrough drugs, while medically valuable, often carry six-figure prices. When even a small fraction of 15 million enrollees start using these medications, the expense for the state can explode. California's efforts to manage drug costs, such as bulk purchasing programs and carving pharmacy benefits into a statewide system, have so far been greatly outpaced by the overall trend of rising drug prices nationwide. Medi-Cal, like other Medicaid programs, has been caught in this pressure of healthcare inflation, necessitating far more funding than originally planned just to cover prescription needs. Now, over the past decade, California has incrementally expanded Medi-Cal eligibility to residents regardless of immigration status. And by 2024, the state opened the program to all income-eligible adults who are undocumented. This policy is historic. California is the first state to offer near universal Medicaid coverage, including to those who lack legal residency. However, the cost of these expansions turned out higher than anticipated, to say the least. This has contributed significantly to the current budget shortfall. In 2016, Medi-Cal coverage extended to all low-income children under 19, regardless of immigration status. Then in 2020, expansion happened to include young adults up to age 26 without legal status. By 2022, expansion to adults age 50 and over without legal status. And then, of course, by 2024, final expansion was implemented for adults age 26 to 49 without legal status, making Medi-Cal available to basically all low-income undocumented residents in California. Now, these expansions have brought health coverage to hundreds of thousands of previously uninsured people. State leaders knew that this would require substantial state funding, since federal Medicaid funds generally do not cover undocumented enrollees. But early cost projections undershot the mark by a long way. For example, the state initially budgeted around $5.8 billion in fiscal year 2024-25 to cover the healthcare of the undocumented population. After a year of full implementation, however, the costs are now estimated at about $8.4 billion for the same year, far above the original projection. In other words, it's costing roughly $2.6 billion more than expected this year to insure undocumented Californians through Medi-Cal. One reason for this is that more people signed up than the state predicted. When the 26 to 49-year-old adult group became eligible in January 2024, enrollment surged beyond projections. Outreach efforts and word of mouth brought in many newly eligible immigrants. By 2025, California's administration has calculated it spends about $8.5 billion from the state's general fund annually to cover Medi-Cal services for residents lacking legal status. Now, this is a significant investment in expanding access, one that Democrats in the legislature champion as essential for equitable health system, but also one of the key factors behind the Medi-Cal budget gap. Republican lawmakers, by contrast, have criticized these coverage expansions, arguing that the state overpromised benefits and might not be able to sustain all of this financially. Of course, we have to talk about the pandemic, its aftermath, and enrollment trends. Although the COVID-19 pandemic has now receded, its effects on Medi-Cal's rolls are still being felt. During the pandemic, federal rules put continuous coverage in place. States had to keep people enrolled in Medicaid without annual re-verification in exchange for extra federal funding. This caused Medi-Cal enrollment to swell dramatically from 2020 through 2022, as people stayed on the program even if their incomes rose modestly. The state began unwinding all this continuous coverage back in mid-2023, meaning it started checking eligibility again and disenrolling those who no longer qualify. Budget writers expected a big drop-off in Medi-Cal enrollment once renewals resumed. However, the drop-off has been smaller than anticipated. Many Californians who gained Medi-Cal during the pandemic have remained eligible or have been slow to transition to other insurance. So Medi-Cal's total caseload stayed higher than the state's budget had assumed. The Department of Healthcare Services reported about 450,000 more people on Medi-Cal in 2024 to 2025 than they had projected in the budget, due in part to slower disenrollment. The state also chose to extend certain flexibilities and timelines for renewals through June of 2025, aiming to prevent people from losing coverage accidentally. While good for continuity of care, these actions meant higher enrollment and costs than the original budget accounted for. Now, beyond enrollment, general healthcare cost growth continues to strain Medi-Cal. Provider payment rates and service utilization tend to increase each year. The LAO notes 3 to 5% annual growth in underlying costs. So even as one-time pandemic expenses wind down, new costs like minimum wage increases for health workers from a recent state law are on the horizon. All these pressures contributed to a perfect storm of rising expenses. These changes were unprecedented and all happened all at once. Now, Director Bass told legislators, referring to the simultaneous coverage expansions, caseload shifts, and cost surges. Other states are seeing Medicaid costs climb too, but California's ambitious health policies amplified the fiscal challenge in 2025. Now, to understand this shortfall in context, it helps to look back at Medi-Cal's growth over the last 5 to 10 years. In many ways, the program's financial squeeze in 2025 is the culmination of a long trend of expanding coverage and rising spending. Medi-Cal enrollment has exploded since the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, and Medicaid expansion, which we recently saw the anniversary of. In 2014, California broadened Medi-Cal to cover low-income adults without children under the ACA, and millions signed up. Enrollment roughly doubled from about 7 to 8 million before the ACA to around 15 million people today. Medi-Cal now covers roughly 1 in 3 Californians, up from about 1 in 5 before the ACA. In fact, Medi-Cal enrollment has quadrupled since the year 1990. About 1/3 of current enrollees are adults who gained eligibility through the ACA expansion, showing how pivotal that policy change was in boosting coverage. Now, California didn't stop with the ACA. As noted before, the state expanded Medi-Cal to various undocumented groups over the past decade. As I mentioned before, children in 2016, young adults in 2020, older adults in 2022, and then all ages by 2024. Each expansion brought tens of thousands of new enrollees. Additionally, eligibility for certain groups was broadened. For example, higher income limits for pregnant women and children, and the recent removal of the asset test for seniors. These moves have made Medi-Cal one of the most inclusive Medicaid programs in the entire country. With enrollments and benefits expanding, Medi-Cal spending has soared. Total Medi-Cal expenditures, state and federal funds combined, roughly doubled over the past decade. In inflation-adjusted terms, what was a around $50 to $60 billion program in the early 2010s is now over $130 to $150 billion total. The state's share of costs also rose. California's general fund spending on Medi-Cal has grown from around $18 to $20 billion a decade ago to $35 to $40 billion today. The general fund is now covering roughly 20 to 25% of Medi-Cal costs, whereas the federal government covers about 70% on average. This spending growth reflects both more people served and higher cost per person. Now, Medi-Cal general funding spending has climbed steeply in recent years and is projected to continue rising. The LAO projects state Medi-Cal costs to grow from around $35 billion in 2024 to 25 to nearly $49 billion by 2028 to 29. That's a 39% increase. And absent major policy changes, all this is going to happen. Underlying pressures include rising medical inflation and the need to backfill other funding sources that are phasing out. The COVID-19 era, 2020 to 2022, marked the fastest enrollment surge in Medi-Cal's history. Amid economic upheaval and the federal continuous coverage requirement, Medi-Cal added roughly 2 to 3 million enrollees in just 2 years, peaking at over 15 million by 2022. During this time, the federal government temporarily paid a larger share of Medicaid costs and added 6.2%. which helped California's budget. But once that emergency aid ended in 2023, the state resumed its normal share of costs, which is one reason the Medi-Cal budget tightened just as enrollment remained elevated. The unwinding process to check eligibility is slow, so Medi-Cal caseloads in 2024 to 25 remained much higher than pre-pandemic. In summary, Medi-Cal's last decade has been one of dramatic expansion in people served, services covered, and dollars spent. Millions of Californians gained insurance, which is a good thing on its surface, but this drove uninsured rates to historic lows, also a good thing. Yet, this success came with a fiscal trade-off. The program now consumes a larger portion of the state's budget and is subject to greater volatility based on economic swings and health cost trends. The 2025 shortfall can be seen as a stress test of the system that has been built up over all these years. Now, the alarming Medi-Cal shortfall has sparked debates among California's policymakers about how to get the program on a more sustainable footing without scaling back its hard-won coverage gains. Several key policy responses are on the table or already in motion. These include infusing new funding via the MCO tax. To help close the gap, California is leaning on its managed care organization, MCO tax, which is a special tax on health plans that brings in federal matching dollars for Medi-Cal. In late 2024, voters approved Proposition 35, which effectively makes the MCO tax permanent. This tax is expected to generate billions for Medi-Cal, about $7.9 billion in the 2024 to 2025 period. This should offset general fund costs. The renewed MCO tax is a crucial financing tool. It allows California to draw extra federal funds and helps pay for provider rate increases and program expansions without solely relying on state general revenue. Going forward, enshrining the MCO tax provides a more stable funding stream for Medi-Cal. though its structure may be adjusted with federal approval over time. Now, state leaders are also looking at ways to rein in cost drivers like prescription drugs and provider payments. Governor Gavin Newsom's administration has pursued initiatives such as CalRx, which is a state effort to manufacture affordable generic drugs, and bulk drug purchasing pools to negotiate better prices. There are ongoing discussions about how to manage expensive, novel therapies. For example, seeking supplemental rebates from drug manufacturers for high-cost drugs that Medicaid covers. On the services side, the state is scrutinizing utilization trends. If certain benefits are driving excessive cost growth, they may consider tightening oversight or alternative care models. However, any cost containment measures must be balanced against maintaining quality and access for Medi-Cal patients. Healthcare inflation is largely driven by factors outside the state's direct control, but California is trying to leverage its large purchasing power. Medi-Cal is the largest Medicaid program in the United States. This could help negotiate savings where possible. Now, despite the budget crunch, there is strong political will in California to protect Medi-Cal's broad coverage. Democratic legislative leaders have signaled that rolling back coverage for undocumented residents or other groups is not on the table. Let's be clear. Assembly Leader Robert Rivas has said, "We will not roll over and leave our immigrants behind." That's what's being said, emphasizing pride in the expansion to all residents. Similarly, health committee chairs argue that keeping people insured, including through the pandemic, is a policy victory, even if it costs more. While some lawmakers have floated ideas like capping enrollment or reducing benefits to control costs, those proposals face steep opposition in the legislature. The consensus among the majority seems to be to preserve Medi-Cal's breadth and find savings or revenues elsewhere, rather than cutting people off. Advocates also caution that any cuts could reverse the state's coverage gains and harm vulnerable populations. Now, budget officials are now building in more cautious assumptions for Medi-Cal moving forward. The governor's latest budget projections account for higher caseloads and costs, so future budgets won't be caught as flat-footed. The administration and lawmakers are also convening stakeholder groups to identify responsible and long-term solutions for Medi-Cal financing. This could include setting aside larger reserves for the program in flush years, smoothing out spending on one-time initiatives, and continuing to seek federal partnership. For instance, California might explore federal waivers to get federal matching funds for certain populations or services currently state-funded only. The threat of potential federal cuts to Medicaid, such as proposals from some in Congress to block grants or cap funding, adds pressure for California to shore up its program's finances. In short, the state is planning ahead to avoid repeat surprises. Better forecasting enrollment, especially among seniors and newly eligible groups, monitoring drug and utilization trends, and securing stable funding sources. Now, California's Medi-Cal story in 2025 is one of big ambitions colliding with fiscal reality. The more than $2 billion shortfall was a wake-up call that even in a state with a strong commitment to healthcare access, budgets have limits. Yet, it has also rallied policymakers to innovate and double down on making Medi-Cal work. As Senate leaders noted in a joint statement, skyrocketing costs are a challenge, but California remains, as they say, steadfast in our commitment to providing coverage, and will work on solutions that millions can continue to thrive with the healthcare they need. The coming years will test how the state can keep Medi-Cal sustainable, juggling the needs of patients, providers, and taxpayers, while preserving the expansive coverage that has become a cornerstone of California's health policy. Now, this Medi-Cal saga is likely far from over. The lessons learned in 2025 will likely shape its next chapters. If you've made it this far in the video, I'd just like to thank you and make one small ask. If you haven't already, please hit the like button. A lot of preparation goes into making a video like this, from script writing to editing, and by liking the video, you're telling YouTube and the algorithm that this content is worth watching. Thanks again, and remember to stay dynamic. Peace.